Do you ever get the feeling of your butt clenching when you're asked, can I give you some feedback? Or maybe you're someone who has to give some feedback and it's the last thing that you want to do because of how it makes you feel or how you're afraid it's going to make the other person feel. Well, if you're either one of those people, I'm glad you're watching this video. I know what it's like to have that reaction and those feelings, whether you're the giver or receiver of feedback. And so in this video, I'm going to share my feel-good feedback approach so that feedback can feel better to both the giver and the receiver, because this is something that you want your people to actually do something with your feedback. Also, hi, my name is Petra and I help Black and Brown and queer leaders align their liberatory values with their liberatory actions, especially when self-doubt is the cause for that kind of discrepancy. This channel is specifically for the QT BIPOC leaders who want to build more authenticity and self-trust into their leadership by integrating an anti-oppression lens, healing tools, and even a little bit of playfulness into their leadership. So now that we've got introductions out of the way, let me tell you one thing you need to remember as you're listening to me talk about my feel-good feedback approach. Here it is. Feedback is about the receiver, not the giver. Oftentimes, those of us that give hard feedback are more focused on what we want to say and what will work for us, instead of thinking about the other person who's going to receive that feedback. If I'm already speaking your language with this perspective shift, then I suggest you download my Feel Good Feedback guide in the description box below. This guide is where I share my best guidance for crafting feedback in a way that feels good for the receiver and the giver. It's about 20-ish pages. I include sections on shared language, feedback delivery methods, scenario setups, and tips to avoid what I call feedback fuckery. With that being said, let's get into the first piece of guidance. Number 1, use your values to inform your feedback delivery. I already know, as someone who's watching this channel, values are very important to you, and so I want to invite you to integrate that even harder into how you're going to give feedback. For example, my feel-good feedback is grounded in 3 values. The first one being the value of generative, which means relating to or capable of production or reproduction. Here's a little metaphor, right? So the feedback I'm helping you to create in this video is intended to be a seed that grows in that other person. With that being said, it's up to you to be thoughtful of what you are sowing in another person. This is where I would highly encourage you to use some critical thinking skills and assess the intention and impact of your feedback. This also means you've got to ask people how they want to grow and evolve so that you can connect the feedback that you're sharing with those goals and that kind of growth that that person has defined for themselves. This all can make sure that our feedback is generative, that it's going to grow in the ways that we want to, and that we're not really here to diminish anyone in our efforts to give some feedback. The second value I hold in this approach is consent. Consent is the permission for something to happen or the agreement to do something. And listen, I want to deeply acknowledge that depending on the feedback or the role that you're in, the feedback receiver may not consent to you giving them this feedback. This is obviously not ideal because you watch this video because you want to learn how to do hard feedback, but I really, really, really want you to commit to this approach if you're going to try it. And I want to stress how non-negotiable consent is if the goal of your feedback is really to be implemented, right? If you really want to be heard, you've got to do it based on that person's consent. The third value that's really embedded in this approach to feedback is trauma aware. It doesn't mean that you need to be a trauma expert, but it really is about you understanding the term trauma and how it can change the way we view and interact with others. I'm a licensed social worker, and so I am an expert in trauma. That doesn't mean that you need to be, but I do want to share this one quote to help you keep in mind as you think about how to not re-traumatize your people with giving them this hard feedback. Peter Levine, who's a leading expert on trauma, said that we become traumatized when our ability to respond to a perceived threat is in some way overwhelmed. In other words, trauma is about loss of connection. It's about loss of connection to ourselves, to our bodies, to our families, to others, and to the world around us. So what does this mean for you, right? It's to think about if the feedback that you're giving, does it make this person lose anything? A piece of themselves, a piece of feeling like they belong at work, in whatever spaces that you two share a social connection. Do they lose some of that with this feedback that you're about to give them? So the next piece of guidance that I want you to do is to ask your people, how do you like to receive feedback? Especially when you want to give them hard feedback. Because it makes me so sad to hear when people have never been asked that question, even to this day. But that can change. You can change that. And I know you want to change that. So if your people can't answer that question, then I want you to use my 3 methods of feedback delivery to craft feedback in a way that the feedback receiver is more likely to hear and therefore implement. So let's get into those methods of feedback. The first method I have is the method of the mode of feedback. This is really related to how feedback is given, right? Here are some questions I want you to ask. Would you like feedback to be given in person, virtually, written, verbally, publicly, privately? Would you like to have some solo time to process the feedback I'm giving you before you and I have a conversation? Would it be easier for you to hear something hard that I have to say if I sandwich them in between 2 easier things to hear? Here are just some questions to get you started around what is the mode? How does this person want feedback to be shared with them? The second method is the sentence stem of feedback delivery. This method is really related to the what. What is in the context of what you're going to be shared? And so here, the question it really is, how would feedback need to be phrased in order for it to feel good for you? Again, people may never have been asked these questions, and so it may open up the floodgates for people, or people may need some support around, like, I'm not even sure how to answer this question. So here's some sentence stems that I have used before as a manager, as a leader, as an organizer, to help you get the juices flowing. And you're probably going to come up with your own questions too, or your own sentence stems rather. One sentence stem could be, I imagine your intention was X, and Y was the impact. That's one way to say feedback. Another one might be, I know you're learning, and I think Z could meet the goal. I know you're learning how to do this thing, but I think doing this other thing might really help support your growth. Another one might be, I noticed that you did A. Can I share some feedback around that? Share with what you can see before you go straight into the kill for the feedback. The third and final method of feedback is the timing. This is really about when feedback is given. For example, let's say you're a morning person. Maybe you have the most energy, you're most alive in the morning. Maybe you'd appreciate hard feedback earlier in the day. It's good to know. Let's say you've had a really fuck all kind of a day. It's been really rough. The last thing you're probably going to want to do is to pile on some difficult feedback on top of that day, because you don't really have the time or the space or the energy to probably process it. And it's not, I would argue, it's not good for you or for the receiver. The third piece around this the timing, is to ask, would you like to receive feedback immediately after an action, an event, or after a particular process has been tried, or would you like to schedule it at a later time? Some people really like to receive feedback immediately after they do something because it's fresh in their minds. They can kind of locate and drop back from that experience. And some other people would much rather schedule it later on because they're fucking tired, and that's okay. The biggest takeaway here for this section around the methods of feedback is to tune into when you and the receiver has the most intention, attention, energy, capacity to give and receive feedback. We really want to optimize when this is happening, because that really matters in order for it to be heard and for something to happen with it, for that feedback to be useful to people. Before I continue, I just want to stop right here and ask you, have you ever got feedback training that included some of these concepts that I'm thinking about? I'd love to know. Please let me know in the comments. All right, so now I've been giving you some context. Now I want to put this context into action with a real life example. As a longtime supervisor, I remember one moment where I had to tell one of my supervisees that the client they were working with no longer wanted to work with them because they were so incompetent. These were my words. I would never, okay. But I had to figure out a way to say that to my supervisee in a way that they could hear it, because that was the feedback. First, I reviewed how they like to receive feedback, which was privately, in person, or in real time, and in the morning. Just like check, check, check. The second thing I did was I reviewed the sentence stem that my supervisee preferred, which was, I imagine your intention was X, and Y was the impact. Again, all of these conversations we had early on, we didn't wait for the need to give feedback in order to have this question. And I break all of that down in my feel good feedback guide around the different scenarios. So don't worry about it if you have questions about that. I'll answer all of that in the guide. So after I knew the sentence stem that they would really prefer to hear, Next, I had to figure out the timing of when I could share this feedback with them. And it just turned out that the feedback was given 1 to 2 weeks away from when the client had initially shared their negative experience with me. Other people may tell you that that is awful, and that's on them. I will say that us having that time to really make sure that when we were going to discuss the feedback was at a time that they could hear it really changed things, right? And we decided to wait a little bit because this supervisee was already going through some personal challenges. And in my personal judgment, it wasn't the right time to dogpile on them around this negative feedback. In the end, what we found was that this person was so grateful and was so open to hear this incredibly hard feedback to hear, because it was done in a way that really prioritized them as the receiver and not me as the giver. Oftentimes we're told that we need to give feedback immediately and just get it done, right? But again, this feedback is grounded in about it being around the receiver and not the giver. Complete switch. This person was able to quickly course correct after we collaborate on a plan to increase her competence around some of the areas that the client had named as areas for growth. Imagine that. Again, I want to underscore that this approach is consent-based, especially when you spend time getting answers to the methods of feedback delivery. Feedback is often harmful because people have no time to prepare for it, not the receiver or the giver. And they actually don't have the head or heart space to hear what you have to say. That's why this approach is so deeply committed to being consent-based. This approach is also generative, especially when you make space for the feedback receiver to define how they want to grow and what's important to them. And then it's up to you as a feedback giver to connect that feedback back to those goals. Again, my experience has been if you want people to do something with the feedback you're giving them, you have to connect it to the ways in which they want to grow. Non-negotiable. This approach is also trauma aware. Just want to underline that, right? And the fact that us as the feedback givers are focused on maintaining that connection to this person. We want to build trust throughout this process, all in an effort to disrupt re-traumatization, right? Many of our organizations are becoming more understanding of the impacts of trauma. And if we don't want to be the kinds of leaders that are perpetuating that on our people, then we need to have a trauma-aware approach into all the different things that we're doing as leaders. If you're digging this approach and what I've shared so far in this video, don't wait no more. I suggest you download the Feel Good Feedback Guide in the description box below and begin to integrate this into your leadership. Again, this is a resource that I've created to take my 10 plus years as a mentor, manager, and all-around possibility activator, right, into the best guidance for how to craft feedback that feels good for you and the receiver. It's about 20-ish pages long, and I have sections on shared language. This is where I go much deeper into what I mean about bringing in a consent-based, trauma-aware, and generative lens into this approach. There's a section on methods of feedback delivery, which I covered in this video and go more in depth into in the guide. I have a section on scenario setups and suggestions. This is where I share my recommendations for you to do things before, during, and after feedback is given. Again, to make sure this is feedback that the feedback receivers are really going to do something with, and so that it feels good for both parties. And the last section is really about feedback fuckery. It's where I share the examples of feedback I've heard over time, feedback colleagues of mine have heard that really should not have been named to us. And I share that in an effort for you to learn what not to do. There's also a section that I call noteworthy, on where I share other different considerations for you to keep in mind if you really want the feedback receiver to implement the feedback you've been shared. All right, don't forget to comment below and let me know whether you've ever gotten feedback training that included these concepts that I share in this video. Let me know in the comments. That's it for me.